Today we have Helen Grubel as our guest for this episode of Descendants, presented by Their Stories Foundation. Helen, I'm very pleased to have you on our show.
Thank you.
You are a second generation survivor,
I am.
and just barely, as you were born just after the war.
Correct. Yeah, 47.
So, what is your personal background? Where were you born, and what was your childhood like?
I was born in Austria, in Hallein, Austria, which is a salt mining town about 10 miles out of Salzburg. And my childhood, I had a very nice childhood. Who knew I was poor? I mean, I had everything I wanted, food, beautiful clothes. My father was a tailor. Um, I think my mother was around until a nursery school or before nursery school when I went somewhere to be taken care of until nursery school. And we then moved what they considered further up north, where it was called Euclid Avenue in Toronto, which, if you move forward now, no one could afford that house today. Let's just put it that way. And then we moved further north from there. And that's where I grew up. And I went to school. And then I went to the Ontario College of Art. And then I got married. And something I didn't, did I want to marry an American? No. It was the middle of Vietnam War and I was very opposed to it. But anyway, here I am, New York. Well, fast forward a few years, I decided to go back to school, Parsons School of Design. I've been an interior designer for a very long time. And just in a nutshell, that's it.
So tell me about your mom and your dad and your family history.
Both my parents were born in Poland. Um, I can't even pronounce the name of the town. My mother came from a bigger town, I think Tarnów, and she did not come from a poor family. Actually, her father had a vacuum factory and a broom factory. My father did come from a farm and a fairly poor factory, and they met on the library steps of some library in some town he was at. The rumors started coming through about Hitler moving his troops through into Poland. My mother's family, even my father's family, for the most part, never believed it. My father believed it. And he said to her, "We need to leave. You come with me." And so she did. Where they went in Poland, I really don't know, but I know my father was in the Polish army. They took him into the Polish army, actually. And you know how long the Polish army lasted, what, 38, 39 days? I don't know. And then today, I guess they would call you, he ran away. He didn't want to be in the army anymore. And he ran into Russia. They took him and brought him up to the Gulag where he did those marches like Elie Wiesel. And my mother was left behind in Russia with a family that wasn't Jewish. The man knew that she was Jewish, and he said to her, in order to survive, I don't trust that my wife will not turn you in. So you
Wow.
come to church with me and with your daughter, and that's what you are. Now, how my father found my mother again, my sister had been born by then, and she maybe was 5 years old. And they took that trip through Europe to find who was left in their families. Rumors were abundant, and my father realized that my mother realized very early on that out of the 7 people in her family, no one survived. My
Wow.
father found his one brother, and they were in constant contact. As a matter of fact, just a little anecdote, when my father would send his older brother a letter, his brother would send him back the letter with all the corrections on it, the spelling corrections on it, he was a very charming man. I love my uncle. And they got to Hallein because it was a displaced persons camp. But in between that, I think I mentioned to you in our talk, young Palestinian freedom fighters stopped them along the way. That's when my father realized he needed to change his last name, which was Englander and very Jewish at the time, to his mother's name, which was Froelich. So they did that, and the few little things that they had, mementos they had, the young Palestinians said, "Give it to us. You cannot have it, especially if we're going to get you or whatever it was to the displaced persons camp." And my father felt he had no choice. He said, "I mean, these are 20-year-old children. I'm never going to see this stuff again, but I have. That's the way it is." So there they are in Hallein. I'm born, and they took out papers to both countries. Canada answered first, and that's why they ended up in Toronto. When they got to Halifax, Nova Scotia, the Canadian government, they took the train. The Canadian government wanted them to go as far west as possible because obviously they wanted people there because it was very sparse, and it still is. So when they ended in Montreal, they stopped in Montreal. My mother very much wanted to be there because people from her town, her brother-in-law her brother-in-law had survived, and that was the sister she adored, who died in a concentration camp. She loved her brother-in-law. He had met a new woman, remarried, and she wanted to meet her, be there in Montreal with the other people, but the Canadian government wouldn't allow it. So they allowed her to stay for 2 days to just meet with them, put them back on a train, and we got to Toronto. And at that point, my father and my mother said, "We're done. Either throw us out of the car," whatever they said, "but we can't go any further. We have 2 young children." And so that's where they ended up in Toronto by chance, basically.
And they met the Palestinian freedom fighters.
Somewhere between Russia and Austria. I
So
don't even know where it was. Maybe even Poland, because I know they went back there to see what had happened to their homes.
so this was 46, 47.
Probably 46. Yeah,
Yeah.
45, 46.
Wow. And they made the arrangements. They helped them make the
Yeah, well, the Palestinians took that, but the Jewish Congress was responsible for making sure we got to Canada, because Canada at the time was not exactly your friendliest country to the Jews. Roosevelt had to intervene in the Canadian with the Canadian Prime Minister, saying, "You have to let them in." I mean, he refused a couple of ships himself, if you recall your history in this
yeah.
country.
Yeah.
Yeah. But finally he let them in, and he did intervene, and they did bring them through.
Right.
And yeah, so
Do you know anything about their parents?
no, except what I told you, that my mother's father had a business and did well. My father's father died very young. He was a baby, and they had a farm and they scrounged. His mother, picked the vegetables, put the fruit, all that kind of stuff. My father wanted to be a fashion designer, but when things started to get really tense, he said, "I'm just going to go to school to be a tailor. Maybe somebody can use me," something like that. So that's what happened there.
Wow. And so he joined the Polish army.
Yeah, I don't think he did
So
it voluntarily, but yes,
so in 1939 he joins the
yes,
Polish army
yes.
and then he runs away.
Right when they fell. He was,
Wow.
yeah, driving a Russian tank. He was artillery, a sergeant in artillery. And he said, and they learned to drive these Russian tanks, 12-cylinder, whatever. He said there wasn't a telephone pole standing.
Wow.
He had some funny stories amidst all
Wow.
of this.
Wow. And when did you first hear this story?
Oh, I was a teenager. I mean, long after my mother died. I mean, I
Oh,
watched my mother, Friday night Shabbos, the Sabbath. She did light the candles and she did say the prayers, and she cried all the time. And I really never understood it until she finally let me know about the sister she loved and the little nephews. They were all, killed. Um, so that's about the gist of it.
so she told you that.
She told me that, and she really couldn't go any further. She really couldn't. I could see that she was choked up, and I let it go because it was hard on me too. It was hard.
Did
Uh,
did you
you
know
know,
what the Holocaust was at that time?
no, no, I did not. No,
You
I did
hadn't
not.
you hadn't heard about it, but you were just hearing about it as this is
Bits
what
and
happened.
yeah, bits and pieces, and from my parents' friends, all with numbers on their arms. All we always got together, all the kids and parents on a Saturday night at somebody's house. You overheard things, and try to piece it together, feeling incredibly guilty for whatever reason. I don't know why.
When you say you tried to piece it together,
Tried
you
to figure out what they were talking about and what really happened and what the tragedy was. The word tragedy never came up in my, vocabulary at that time. But later when we were 17 or 18 and 19,
are you talking
I
about you and your siblings?
yeah, well, I have one sister
Yeah.
who's 6.5 years older than I am.
Mm.
Um, she remembers a lot more because she was, around when I was
Yeah.
born and traveling with, running with them.
Right, right. And so when did you first fully understand what the Holocaust was?
Well, my father sat down and somewhere, and I tried to find it after our phone call. I have it somewhere. He wrote down as much as he could. It wasn't really chronological about his life a little bit. And if I do find it, I will share it with you,
Yeah.
because it was interesting.
How, how how old were you then?
When he shared it with me,
Yeah.
I think I was about 18 or 19 years old. And then he was interviewed by my very young cousins later and nephews when they were in high school because they were really learning it then. And
Yeah.
so they interviewed him several times.
How did it make you feel? Do you remember like when he was telling you about this, when he was
I,
sharing
I,
his
I,
stories?
it was very hard for me because I have no knowledge of the camp. I just knew my life in Toronto was nice and I didn't want for anything. And we had friends and all these people were my family. It's hard to comprehend. It's hard to comprehend. And only as I got older, only after I lost my mother, only after she died, was I able to comprehend more the tragedies because I had it for myself, not in that global sense, but
Right, right. You felt what it was like to lose somebody.
yeah, but not, I mean, yes, it was tragic. She was sick for 2 years, but, I had my dad and I had my sister.
Looking back on it, was there trauma in your family because of it? Can you see
Yes, I
anything?
can see if I look back on it, I can see some of the arguments my parents might have had about why they didn't go back and get my sister, not my sister, my mother's sister. I Most of it wasn't from my parents. It was from my mother's friend who had, I mentioned to you, Eichmann particularly had done the surgery on her uterus without benefit of anesthesia. And those were little pieces that I heard because of things that were going on, especially when Eichmann was found. I was already old enough to understand, that's it. That was the time I understood. Now I know, I remember when Eichmann was found and the Nuremberg trials went on, trying to remember when that was, that's when I got a picture of it, and especially from Toby, Toshka, as we called her, when she just lost it. And my parents never wanted to talk about it, but when she lost it like she did, and I was there, it all did come out.
And who told you that story?
Well, I heard it from her because she was screaming and throwing herself all over the place
Mm.
because Eichmann had finally been convicted and she finally let it out. My mother always knew, so did my father, but they weren't about to tell me that story. But then they just told me quickly about that. And it still was hard to comprehend. It was still, my mother hadn't died just, I was 15 years old, 14,
Yeah,
15 years old when Eichmann was found, right? 13, 14, something like that, if I
yeah.
go back.
Right, right. Wow. That's traumatic.
Yeah, it was really traumatic as I think about it now.
Yeah. So they were. they were in a sense, not in a sense, but they were re-traumatized again,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
by
Oh,
the trial and by,
oh my God. She was especially my mother's friend because she really, in particular, knew Eichmann because that's who did what he did to her. Yes.
oh,
And she was one of the ones that didn't believe. She said it. She was a wealthy German Jew, and they just didn't believe Hitler would do this to these wealthy Jews or
yeah,
Austrian Jews. It's
right.
interesting.
They were living a good,
Very a high life.
yeah, and a lot
Yeah.
different than the Eastern European.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Wow. So
And I watched her put food in her bag whenever we left the house. An apple went in or something. I could never understand that. I said, we're going somewhere. We have a picnic lunch. What is she doing? But they never answered me. Now
mm,
I understand. Well,
right.
yeah, yeah,
Wow, that is so interesting.
it is.
Do you feel like trauma gets passed down?
Yeah, guilt and trauma. And I once said to my mother, how come you survived? It was I was just a very young child. She actually laughed and she said, your father made me go with him. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, neither would you. But
Uh,
you carry that with you.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
carry it with you. And like I said, I said once, I think when they die, maybe I'll let go of this burden. But it got heavier after my father died to make sure that I don't forget or that no one else forgets who's interested in hearing
yeah,
about it.
yeah, yeah. Do you feel like you've learned any life lessons because of your experiences, because of your experiences as a second generation survivor?
Oh, I've learned to be tolerant of other people, other religions, other colors. I think that I when Alan and I, as we were 23 years old, went back to Europe, and I did not want to go to the Anne Frank house, but the four of us made me. I realized then what has changed. There were starving children in Biafra at that time. You could see all of that going on. I don't think we really learn from history. I think history repeats itself all the time. And we see it time and time again for whatever group of people it is, or racism there is. If you go back into Canada with the First Nations, it's horrendous. It's horrendous, and it continues. And I believe, I never did, but I think you read the book Lord of the Flies. There is evil in us. I'd like to get rid of that.
Yeah.
There just is.
So do you think of yourself as a second generation survivor?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll wear it as a badge almost. To what's it's interesting. Most
Yeah.
of my friends here have no connection to me in that respect. Their parents were born in New York. They're born in Baltimore, Washington, New York, wherever they were. So how many, except for Ida and me and my sister and my dear friend who just died, we speak Yiddish fluently. That was my first language.
Wow.
How many people do you know, even my age, who speak Yiddish fluently? They don't. It's a great language, very visual.
So, yeah, I mean, you lost your parents,
Well, I lost my mother when I was very young. I
right?
turned 16. She died August 3rd, and I turned 16 July 30th.
And then your dad died.
Well, he didn't die till he was 100. Oh my God, he was tough.
What year was that?
Um, he died not long before COVID. And I was
Oh,
almost grateful he died because he would never have believed COVID. And he would have been furious at me that I couldn't come see him.
oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah, he was.
Wow. That's a survivor, huh?
Yes, he had been through a lot. He even had a second marriage and
Right.
divorced her when he was 86 years old. That was very funny.
That
That was I called her the angry bitch. It
that's unbelievable.
is. Yes. Yes.
So sadly, we are losing survivors
Yes.
all the time, and one day every one of them will be gone.
And people want to forget, John. They do.
So
I
how do we preserve their memory? How do
I
you?
think I think it's through people like you. I think it's through people like you who are willing to do this and document it and make sure that it's out there. And maybe the schools will teach it along with everything else horrendous that has been done. I mean, Canada kept their secret for how long? Little rumors here and there, but it's only 2, 3 years ago where it really came out. This happened when 90 years. I mean, it's terrible.
80, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that country everybody thinks is so perfect, Canada. Well, no.
right. Um, so it's been said that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper.
Yeah, just
Why do you
scratch the surface.
why do you think that is? Does it make any sense to you?
It doesn't make any sense to me personally. And every time something comes up with the Jewish name like Epstein, I start to, my stomach goes into a knot, and I feel as a Jew responsible. I don't want to hear those terrible things about Jews because it just, then people say, well, see,
Yeah, yeah. How does one deal with it?
I lock it away. I compartmentalize it. I lock it. I have to lock it away. There's nothing I can do about it except the people who know me get to know me as a Jew personally, have a different feeling. And I'll quickly tell you a story about my husband, who's an IBMer, who was an IBMer, and IBM wasn't known for liking their Jews either. But okay, we'll leave that aside. He's in this organization, and this man John talked to me a little bit later when we got together once as a social thing. He said, Helen, I grew up, he was much older than my husband. He said, I grew up upstate New York in an extraordinarily racist and anti-Semitic family, and that's what I came to the table with when I met your husband. I was anti-Semitic. He said, but that one man changed my mind. That one man in that group is the only one that gave me a chance and an opportunity to move forward, because my husband is educated and this man was not. He just went into IBM low level, whatever it was, tried to work his way up. And my husband helped him. He said, no, you could do better than this, and I'll show you. That's how you change people's minds, one good Jew at a time.
Right.
And he said that to me. He said, I love him. He's wonderful. And I will, and if what I can do, if anybody else, people I grew up with, I will set them straight. He's long died, but it was interesting to me what he said. But you're
That's
talking to, my husband is a child of the 60s. He marched with Martin Luther King. So there you are.
right, right. So we've interviewed a lot of survivors, and they're being, we mentioned the word re-traumatized before, but they're being re-traumatized by current events.
Yes.
Um, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I, and all of them, I could say all of them have a have fear,
Yeah.
and is that part of being Jewish?
Yes. I mean, I was called a rich, dirty Jew in high school. Now I understood why, because I certainly looked wealthy. There was no question. Nobody dressed as well as I did, except the wealthy kids, really.
Right.
Um, but I was still called a wealthy, dirty Jew. She very little did she know that we almost lost our house several times. But the banks in Toronto were a little more forgiving than they would be today on mortgage payments and so on. You know.
Wow.
So yeah, and there were restricted places. I knew there were clubs that Jews couldn't belong to.
And how about now? What do you feel now?
About that.
No,
I
about fear.
I have not felt it personally. I belong to a place called Lifetime. It's a big, huge club. It's like a city. It's an exercise place, and I do Zumba, and I love it. But I have a group of women who uh, uh, some are Jewish, a lot of them are not, and some younger than me. They don't understand it, and they want me to wear my Jewish star every single day. And they just don't get it. They just don't get it. And they worry more than I do. I've not felt it yet, but I live in Westchester. I'm right in White Plains and Scarsdale and Purchase, a very large Jewish population here.
Right, right.
So Toronto has felt it more,
Wow.
my family has said. Yeah. And New York City, look, I think it's going to peter out and have its time. I think the palace, I mean, look, between you and me, uh,
Well, we're being recorded right now.
yes, well, that's right, not between you and me, but really, if you want to call collateral damage the Palestinians, it's terrible. It's terrible. Nobody wants mothers and children to die. But people forget that Israel was attacked. And if they know anything about Israel, they need to understand that Israel will not wait and will not hold back. And that's never again. That word never again. People don't understand it.
Yeah,
But Jews do. It's because we went to these gas chambers like sheep. Oh,
right.
they're just taking us away. Nothing's going to happen. Disbelief. Well, now they've gone to the extreme.
Yeah, I think
If
I that's so interesting. I had never thought of that before, that about the term never again. It sort of sounds very passive, like may it never again happen,
no,
but it means like it's never going to happen again.
correct. You will
Yeah,
never do this to us again. We will retaliate with everything we have, regardless, I think, of maybe the damage that we have to do. Don't forget, I mean, when I stood at the shores of Israel and I saw 15 miles away, they want to kill us. We are surrounded by people who want us gone. And we are and see, it's interesting that I say we, because I'm not Israeli, but it's the only democratic country in the Middle East. It just is. And I don't, I remember the 9/11. Every single person who was Muslim or an Arab was attacked. I found that to be outrageous. I understood it because of fear. I understood it. So this is what may be happening now. I don't know.
well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate all your thoughts. Is there anything else you'd like to add that might be a word to somebody who's watching this maybe years from now? Is there any kind of words of wisdom that you might share?
It's that same old adage that everybody knows, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah.
I really believe that. And until you get to know somebody, you cannot hate them. You could hate them after you get to know them.
I think we'll end it there.
Okay.
That was priceless. That was priceless. So thank you so much for
Thank you very much. I
being a
appreciate
guest
this.
on Descendants, presented by Their Stories Foundation. If anybody likes what you see, go to our website, theirstoriesfoundation.org, and you can learn more about it. You can make a donation if you like, and have a good night. Thank
Thank
you.
you.